In times of national turmoil, the greatest danger to religious leaders is quietism.
Just as dangerous in such a situation is to respond by fomenting fears.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Thank you, Mark. I also would like to welcome you to today's program. We're so very glad you've joined us. If you're a regular viewer, a special welcome to you. Welcome back. And if you're new to the program, I hope you like what you see and what you hear today. We hope that you'll tell your friends about the program, too. Before we get started into our discussion, I'd like for you to meet our panelists. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right.
Hi, I'm Carl Trovall. I'm the Richard J. Dinda Professor of Lutheran Identity and Mission at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
I'm Tom Plumley. I'm the Senior Minister at First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
I'm Bishop Michael Olson, and I serve as the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
I'm Tony Matthews, and I serve as Senior Pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
I'm Andrea Luxon. I'm President of Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan, which is affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
My name is Dan Levin. I'm the Senior Rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
Well, thank you, everyone, for being here today. As you can see, we have a quite diverse group gathered around this table today, and we're very thankful for that. And I'm very glad that you've tuned in for today's very important discussion. So let's get right to that. Though many are often tempted to regard our present times as the very worst, forgetting the hazards and unhappiness of previous eras, it must be admitted that this present era is at least a very tumultuous time. Division, denunciation, and misunderstanding seem to rule the day. Scandal and accusations of misconduct abound. Everyone seems to have plenty of fingers to point out blame, and those fingers point back and forth across almost any line, barrier, group, or distinction among us. Faith communities and their leaders often find these waters treacherous and difficult to navigate. We each have a mission and a message, but how is that mission to be lived? In addition, how and when is that message to be delivered, and by whom, and how often? And that is to say nothing of institutional and personal needs like membership gain or loss, financial consequences, job security, the sense of accomplishment, or faithfulness itself. I'd like for our panelists to consider these questions. First of all, at what point does a faith group or leader ignore too much that's going on in the larger society, lapsing into quietism and blessing the status quo and immorality by failing to confront them? Here's another question. At what point does a faith group or leader become overly identified with a cause or party and simply add to the turmoil? And then finally, can unity and faithfulness both be goals? Those are the questions I'd like our panelists to consider today. Let's go back to those who helped to begin the program with their opening statements. And so, Dr. Matthews, welcome back to the program.
Good being here.
Can you elucidate your opening comment, please?
Yes, this report is really neat. It's I think it's something that's pretty relevant to the body of Christ and for religious leaders. And I'm going to speak from a pastor's perspective, because, of course, when you pastor people and you have different views in the congregation, we have people in our church who are affiliated with both political parties. We have different races in our churches, and we have a few people from different cultural backgrounds. So you're going to have a good mixture of individuals. And so if you have a president, as is written in the, as you mentioned, the moderator's statement, if you have a president who is seen as a lightning rod, and if that president does something that is offensive or says something that's offensive, it's okay for religious leaders to speak out against that. I think one misunderstanding we have in the in local churches is that we think that if we say something against, or if we call out someone for a wrong activity, that is synonymous with not supporting the person. I think we have to get to the place where we can call wrong wrong and right, no matter who the person is, and that goes for any president. I also think that ministers, pastors, church leaders, synagogue leaders, all of us are responsible. We're obligated to speak to the issues of the day. The prophets were keenly aware politically of what was going on in their day. They didn't put their heads in the sand. They spoke to the issues, and that's pretty important. So we can't let the applause, we can't rise with the applause or sink with the boos in a local church setting, because you're going to get them both. So I think we have to speak to the issues of the day.
All right, thank you very much. And then Bishop Olson, welcome to the program. Your thoughts on the subject?
Thank you. That's, I think, an excellent topic, and especially because it calls forth our responsibility as religious leaders, both in governing or administrating the people that we serve, or the God whom we serve and our people that we're entrusted with, and also the prophetic voice that we're called to utter. I think there's a great need for prophecy today, and the prophets, while certainly not afraid of conflict, we're keen on speaking God's vision and desires for his people, as I understood them within society. And of course, there was great tumult that followed. I think too often today, the temptation, though, is just to confuse that prophetic utterance with just simply anger. And I think one of the marked differences is when we look at ad hominem attacks, which just seem to be rampant in what passes for discourse today, and what passes through the social media, particularly where we have statements without real accountability being made. And then it just rancor and fear just gets fomented, and we run the risk of great violence in society because of that, and we see evidence of that. But I think then it's more important for us as well then to speak the truth well, as we understand it, to speak it calmly and with clarity, because I think currently there's just as much crisis in reason and right reason in our discourse and in our society today as there is with faith.
All right, thank you very much. And Rabbi Levin, welcome back to the program. What are your thoughts on this subject today, please?
So it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. In the Talmud, there's a beautiful phrase that says, Al tifrosh min hatzibur, don't separate yourself from the community. And you can't pretend, whether you're a religious leader or just an individual, that the events or the conflicts that are taking place in the world, the moral questions that need to get answered, need to be answered by somebody else. At the same time, I think it's important that religious leaders balance what their mission is. If you want punditry, there are plenty of pundits out there. And I don't know that the role of a religious leader is to play or to add yet one more pundit's voice. What I think religious leaders can do is they can bring the moral wisdom of a particular faith tradition to bear on the questions that are being asked in a particular day. And that's where I feel like religious leaders need to be participating, to elevate the conversation about the moral questions. As the bishop was saying, to quiet the discourse without being quiet.
All right, thank you very much. And Reverend Plumley, your position, please.
Yeah, I think about a lot of biblical verses come to mind, beginning with the angel chorus on the night of Jesus' birth, speaking of glory to God and peace on earth, and Paul praying at the end of one of his letters that the God of peace might be with folk. And yet Jesus, saying that I came to set one against another. I came to set father against son and mother against children. And he castigated those who cried peace, peace when there is no peace. So there's a place for the religious leaders to be speaking out.
All right, thank you very much. Let's come down to Dr. Luxton. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts so far?
I think there's always a temptation for the quietism. It would be nice for that to be the answer. As a university president, a faith-based institution, whenever something happens, people say, so what are you going to say? Are you going to put something out? Are you going to make a statement? Everybody wants to control your message and tell you that you need to be speaking, right? And it would be nice to just say, I'm not going to say a thing. I don't believe we can do that. I agree. I think the scriptures are full of evidence that we are expected to speak out against issues in society. We're intended to be engaged in society. And I think particularly of our younger generation, who sometimes find the churches and faith traditions irrelevant, it's because they don't see us as relevant to society and relevant to the issues. So I think there has to be a responsibility. But I think it's very important that that is framed within a moral context, not a context of support for this group or this group or this group. So I think we need to make sure that we are, as a colleague of mine said once, by no means political, but by all means biblical in what we say and when we speak out. And I think that absolutely has to be done. I think it has to be done in a measured way, but I think it needs to be related to the issues, not so much the people. And I agreed with the ad hominem, the speaking against the person does little except inflame. But I think to speak to the issues and try and encourage people to see the issues as bigger than any political group is very important in the way we speak out and talk.
All right, thank you. Dr. Troval, so far, what are your thoughts on this? Are you an advocate for quietism?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Well, so how do you strike that balance?
Well, it's a great question, because the flip side to what Andrea just said is that one of the reasons that young people are leaving churches is because of the political polarization that they feel happen when they walk into the community. That a community primarily has a Republican agenda or a Democratic agenda. Obviously, that's a complicated question and issues, but speaking out prematurely, or if I could use a word, the old Greek word hubris, the sense of pride. It's easy to say we're going to be a prophetic voice, but sometimes you really aren't prophetic. All you are is a person standing in the moment thinking you're prophetic, and you really aren't very humble at all about really considering what the real question is. And so, to me, I think it's important that we do speak up to the ethical issues. I like the phrase you use, the deep moral wisdom of the tradition and the scripture, to bring to bear upon issues. I like it when we focus on the issue. Hunger is an issue, but how you attack global hunger, that is something, I don't know that any of us who are religious leaders have any more insight into that issue than people who work in that area.
So there are times when the church should never be silent on certain issues.
No.
But then there are those times, those gray areas when we get into politics, we get into different points. You mentioned Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, wherever it is. And we're going to find that in our churches and synagogues. How do you strike that balance? Dr. Matthews, I don't know how it is in your church. How do you strike that balance in your church?
Well, we, as Andrea said, we separate the people from what we perceive are biblical problems, which derive from certain policies that are made. So I think one practical thing to do is, if you're preaching through books in the Bible, you're going to, at some point, touch on these topics. And when you touch on those topics, you just have to preach the word, expound on the word. And if a Democrat or Republican, if one of those individuals' policies are in play, you talk about the issue and not the person. So it's unavoidable. And I think it's the way you don't denigrate people. because presidents, congressmen, congresswomen, these are, people made in the image of God, and we just focus on the issues and not the people.
And that really is a core principle, right at the core of civility, would you say?
Yeah.
To be civil about your disagreement, but
Right.
feel free that you can express that.
Right, but there are some things that will outrage us, at certain topics, and you have to just kind of care from them.
All right, Reverend Plumley?
Yeah, civility is a term that also should be handled with great grace, because sometimes that can be an artificial quietism. It could be an artificial stop to what really needs to be said quite passionately. I think of Amos, I think of Isaiah walking through the streets naked. I think of Jeremiah making people so angry that they threw him in a pit and left him there. There are all sorts of biblical examples of folks that were in their day judged to be uncivil. Not that I'm going to say that we should be uncivil, but there are limits to that too. And I would say I would quibble, Andrea, with the notion that we can't be political. We cannot be partisan.
Partisan, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Politics is simply getting things done, and we need to get things done.
All right, thank you. Dr. Luxon, you want to respond to that? Please?
Yeah, I think there are the prophets in the Bible, but there are also the kings and there are also the disciples. And you've got multiple models of responding to the evils in society. And I think there are some that might speak out against what is happening. And I think that can be done. But I think it also ideally is framed within the values which we hold, which we are committed to and which we will uphold, including ways to actually do that and respond to a situation. So it's not just a calling out what is wrong, but it is actually suggesting a path forward of what is right and what is important and what builds up our society. And I think that needs to be a very, very strong voice.
All right, Bishop Olson.
I think it's a very good discussion. I think that at least the approach that I try to take as one of the Catholic bishops in the United States is precisely that we speak to issues, we look at the situation, speak to issues, and to talk policy over partisanship. And it gets us in trouble generally with everybody at some different time. But I think that's a good place to be. I feel it's a morally sound place to be generally. The challenge is, I think, and I don't think this is a Catholic issue, but just it seems like we belong as a society in a way that's more as spectators than as participants. And I mean, as far as I know, we hear people aren't coming to church like they have in the past. And, well, where are they going? They don't seem to be going anywhere. They stay at home and they stay online, and the communities they form are intentional communities based on a screen. All right, so it's really a solipsistic understanding of the universe. And I think that somehow that's a challenge as far as belonging. And you can belong to a party that way because, which then can become so strident that it bears very little difference from a gang. And I think that's a challenging aspect of society. I think I'm not condemning a means of communication, but I just think where are we belonging and according to what?
And you said something that raises the issue in my mind. What about social media and the role that social media is playing in our discourse and the way that we relate to issues that we don't agree upon? What is happening online with that as compared to what is happening live and in person? Do we say the same things in church that we would say online? I don't think so. I would hope not. But how is that all interrelated, Reverend Plumley?
Well, another thing that I would say is that we need to balance what we speak or do our speaking or not speaking also based on what's going on generally. Since these are so divisive times, since this is such a tumultuous era, things are different now. And we need to adjust how and whether we speak accordingly.
Rabbi, you have just a few seconds here before we end this segment. What are your thoughts on this so far? Your
So
reaction?
I think one of the things I hear from members of my congregation is how they are often looking to their place in the synagogue as a refuge from all of the tumult that they see in the larger world. That when they come for the Sabbath, they want to take a break and rest from all of the discord that they find in the larger culture. And I respect that. At the same time, I think that there is an obligation that we have not to stir the pot further, but to try to elevate the wisdom and the understanding that help us individually and collectively to answer the moral questions of the day. And there are sometimes that coming to church or synagogue is a time to make the comforted uncomfortable.
Thank you. That's thank you for that. And that's all the time we have for this segment. It went by so quickly. But there is an important announcement I'd like for you to stand by to listen to. And when you're finished with that, stand by for our summations. We'll be right back.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the town hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Thank you, and welcome back. I do look forward to listening to or hearing and seeing what you have to say. Sometimes you leave messages for us, you write us notes. That's great, because we get some really good ideas as to what subjects and topics we can talk about in future programs. For the past programs, we have them archived for you there at the website. You can find a lot of really interesting things there at the website. Like Mark, I would encourage you to go there and see what is there. Let's go to our summary statements now, and for that, let's begin with Dr. Trovall. You're first.
I had a seminary professor once who, when he was talking about preaching, said, well, when you throw a bone into a pack of dogs, it's going to hit one of them. And I don't particularly care for the metaphor, but obviously it was so striking that I remember it. But I think his point was that there's nothing that you can say if you're really trying to be truthful morally or speaking out of Scripture. It's going to be pretty challenging not to say something that doesn't hit someone in a way that becomes challenging for them. And I think it's important that we continue to be that voice as religious leaders, but that it's also done with a sensitive one that's in dialogue, in community with the people that we're with, so that there's always a relationship.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Now, Bishop Olson, your summary, please.
Well, I think the prophetic voice that's uttered by religious communities also has to be animated by a desire for conversion on the part of the person speaking the voice, conversion from our own fears and sinfulness, for greater desire to love God and to love our neighbor, and to speak clearly His truth, which is His desire for all people to come together as His children.
All right. Thank you. Dr. Luxton.
I think this is a really difficult conversation. I think we all agree that as faith communities, we do have a responsibility to what happens around us in our communities. We cannot be separated from that. But in this world where the strong voices are just prevailing in all directions, how do you speak in a way that is really meaningful in this conversation, in a way that can actually be heard? Anything you say is likely to have backlash of social media, and so how do you break through all of that? I think we need a lot of wisdom. Maybe we also need a lot of prayer,
All right.
in order to find the way that voice can be heard and the way we can speak.
Thank you. Now, Rabbi Levin, your summation, please.
I think the goal that I always try to strike is one of balance. How do you balance the need for us to address the issues of the day while creating a sanctuary where people all can feel safe irrespective of their partisan opinions? How can you help people elevate the content of their conversations and their understanding while at the same time cultivating enough humility to realize that none of us has a monopoly on the truth? And figuring out how we can strike that balance, to me, is probably the best piece of wisdom that we can learn in trying to figure out how we can be the most effective leaders of faith communities in this country.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Matthews.
Yes. I'll close by answering the question, question 3. Can unity and faithfulness both be goals? Absolutely. Firmness of conviction and inclusiveness? Yes. Pastoral care and prophetic challenge? Yes. And civility and confrontation of sin? Without a doubt. It can happen, but we have to do it with wisdom and grace.
All right, and thank you. Now, Reverend Plumley, your summation, please.
Thank you. I think one of the keys is to have as few non-negotiables as possible, and to ask ourselves to turn to those sections of Paul's writings where he describes the work of the Spirit and the work of the Spirit's opposite, and ask which are we producing? Are we producing? Or is what we're saying producing divisiveness, division, partisanship, party spirit, or is it producing love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control? If we can answer those questions, then we will know how to be involved in these larger issues of the day.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. And what's occurred to me is you've modeled what you've been preaching and teaching here very well in terms of discussing issues that you might not agree with the person sitting next to you, but you do it with a sense of grace, sense of dignity and understanding. And that really is what communication is about, to understand and to be understood. And sometimes we're shouting so loudly that we can't hear the other one and what they're saying. We can't even hear ourselves sometimes. So thank you. I've been blessed by this, and I hope you have too. I hope that as you've tuned in today, that you've appreciated what goes on here at the Town Hall on a regular basis. For those of you who've been here a long time with us, you know that this has been going on for decades, and we hope to continue that for a long time as well. But if you're new to the program, this is the way it is. We get people from different backgrounds, different faiths, and what we do then is we help each other to understand the other's point of view. And I think that is the genius of it. The Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. So friends, until next week at the same time and of this very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.